It was a rainy Thursday night, the kind of night when most people wanted to be home under a blanket with a cup of tea. But Daniel Carter, a 35-year-old single father, had no such luxury. He had just come from a long shift at the auto repair shop, his hands still carrying the faint smell of oil, his shoulders aching from hours of labor. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, sat in the back seat of the truck humming to herself, her small voice blending with the rhythmic tap of rain against the windows. Daniel pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, the one place open late enough for them to grab dinner before heading home. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, the food was decent, and the neon open sign always felt like a beacon after a long day. The bell above the door jingled as they walked in, and a wave of warmth and the smell of fresh coffee washed over them. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and a group of young men in hoodies and baseball caps huddled in a booth at the far end. Daniel noticed them immediately, not because they were loud, but because their eyes followed the young waitress moving between tables. She had blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail and a smile that seemed too forced to be genuine. "Hi there," she said, walking over to greet Daniel and Lily. "Table for two?" Her voice was polite, but there was something in her eyes, a tension, a flicker of unease, that Daniel picked up on instantly. They took their seats near the window, and Daniel noticed the first sign. Sign number 1, the waitress avoided turning her back on the booth of young men. Every time she passed them, she angled her body so she could keep them in sight, her smile tightening whenever they called out to her. "Hey sweetheart, bring me another coffee," one of them said, his voice oily and smug. She didn't even look at him, just nodded quickly and went to the counter. As she brought menus to Daniel and Lily, he noticed sign number 2, her hands were trembling. She tried to hide it by gripping the notepad tightly, but Daniel had seen hands like that before, shaky, tense, ready to flinch. He had worked years in tough environments, and he knew what fear looked like when someone was trying to mask it. "What's your name?" Lily asked innocently. The waitress smiled down at her. "I'm Emily," she said softly, her eyes flicking toward the men again. While they ordered, Daniel's gaze kept drifting toward the far booth. One of the men, a tall one with a shaved head, kept whispering to the others, grinning and glancing at Emily. The second time she passed, he stuck his foot out slightly, forcing her to step awkwardly around him. Daniel's jaw tightened. A few minutes later, Daniel noticed sign number 3, Emily's manager never came out to check on her. The middle-aged man behind the counter was too busy chatting with a regular to notice, or maybe he was pretending not to notice, what was happening. That told Daniel that Emily was on her own in this situation. Lily was coloring on a kid's menu, oblivious to the tension, but Daniel couldn't relax. When Emily brought their food, she bent down to place the plate in front of Lily, and Daniel noticed a faint red mark on her wrist. Sign number 4, a fresh bruise, half hidden by the cuff of her sleeve. It didn't look like something from carrying trays, it looked like fingers had been there. The group in the back booth laughed loudly, and one of them slapped the table. "Hey, Emily, you forgot my refill. Want me to come get it myself?" The tone was mocking, and his friends snickered. She froze for just a fraction of a second before walking over with the coffee pot. As she leaned to pour, the tallest one reached out and brushed her hip with his hand. She stiffened, jerked the pot slightly, and some coffee sloshed onto the table. His grin widened. That was sign number 5, the silent flinch. Daniel's gut burned with anger. He didn't need any more proof Emily was being harassed, and she was trapped in her own workplace with no backup. Daniel's first instinct was to stand up and put himself between her and the men, but he forced himself to think. If he caused a scene without a plan, they could twist the story. He had to do this right. He caught Emily's eye when she passed and gave her a small, reassuring nod. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but she walked on. The men weren't stopping. One of them whistled as she walked away, another mumbled something that made the others burst into laughter. Daniel's fists curled under the table. Lily looked up at him. "Daddy, are those guys being mean to her?" she asked. Daniel gave her a tight smile. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said softly. "And I'm not going to let it keep happening." When Emily went to the kitchen, Daniel stood and walked casually toward the counter, making sure to pass by the men's booth. Their conversation quieted, and the tall one gave Daniel a smirk as if challenging him. Daniel didn't react, but he made a mental note of his face. He asked the manager quietly, "Do you know those guys in the back?" The man shrugged. "Regulars. Bit loud, but they tip okay." Daniel's jaw clenched. The man wasn't going to help. That meant it was on him. As Emily came back out, Daniel intercepted her at the end of the counter. "If you need me to step in, just say the word," he said quietly. Her eyes widened, and for the first time that night, her mask slipped. "Please," she whispered, almost too soft to hear. That was all he needed. He returned to the table, his mind already working out exactly how he was going to end this before it went any further. The rain outside kept pouring, but inside Daniel Carter was a storm ready to break. Chapter 2. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. The men grew bolder with each pass Emily made to their table. Daniel's muscles tensed every time they spoke to her, every time one of them leaned too far into her space. He kept his eyes on them, but he could feel Emily's nervous glances in his direction. She knew he was watching, and that gave her just enough courage to keep going. Then it happened. The tall one slid out of the booth, stepping right into her path as she carried a tray of drinks to another table. "Whoa there, sweetheart," he said, pretending to steady her with a hand on her waist. "You almost bumped into me." His friends laughed. Daniel was already out of his seat before he even realized it. "Back off," Daniel said, his voice calm but cold. The man turned, sizing him up. "What's your problem, old man?" Daniel didn't blink. "My problem is you think you can put your hands on someone who didn't ask you to." The man's smirk faltered for half a second before returning. "We're just having a little fun. She doesn't mind." Daniel glanced at Emily, who stood frozen, her tray shaking slightly. "She minds," Daniel said firmly. "And you're done." One of the others stood up, but Daniel stepped forward, his tone low and sharp. "Sit down. This ends now, or I make it end." The tension snapped in the air. The tall one looked at Daniel for a long moment, trying to gauge if he was bluffing. He wasn't. Years of hard work, single parenthood, and fighting through life's unfairness had hardened Daniel into someone who didn't flinch. Finally, the man scoffed. "Whatever, man. Let's go." He shoved past Daniel, muttering under his breath, and the others followed. They left a few crumpled bills on the table and pushed out into the rain. Emily let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel gave her a small nod. "You don't have to thank me. No one should have to deal with that." Lily piped up from their table. "Yeah, my daddy's like a superhero." Emily smiled faintly, though her eyes were still wet. When the manager finally noticed something had happened and ambled over, Daniel told him plainly, "If you don't take care of your staff, you're going to lose them. And maybe more than that." The man looked away, muttering something, but Daniel didn't care. His job was done. As they left the diner, Emily caught his sleeve. "I've had people see it before," she said quietly. "But they all looked the other way." "You didn't." Daniel gave her a warm, steady look. "Sometimes, you just have to be the person who doesn't stay silent." They stepped into the rain, and Lily slipped her small hand into Daniel's. As they walked toward the truck, Daniel felt that deep, quiet satisfaction that came from doing the right thing, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary.